Members of the panel, we don't think on the balance that employers with strong profit incentives, with strong preconceptions of what it means to be a mentally ill person, are the ones likely to think of job applicants who admit to their mental illness or when they have records to those kind of mental illness are unlikely to be the ones who think we ought to give this guy a chance. We think what they are proposing is a world in which employers have the unilateral power to say no to a job applicant right on the face of it, right? And we don't think that's something that side government is all right with. First, coming to our model, under which conditions are we absolutely disallowing employers to access mental health records, right? One, we think what we are fine with on our side is an employee or a job applicant voluntarily disclosing any history of mental illness, right? And the one caveat that we do have is that if there is a history of violence related to an applicant's health, to the point of third party or self harm, then we will require that candidate to then disclose it. We tell you that that is not where the debate lies because those cases are extremely outlier, right? You're talking about disorders such as big personality culture, how will this person perform? We think those are things that are irreversibly colored on their side that they can't do anything right now. Right? Now, why we think this is so bad, right? Because we think it's pretty deplorable. Like, given that we've established that the larger probability is towards this employer actually denying this person a job versus actually accepting it, we think this is pretty bad, right? Because one, in terms of these mentally ill, why we think getting a job is so like important towards coping with your mental illness in the first place, right? In terms of finally, like, in terms of your identity becoming something more than your mental illness, right? One, we think it often takes people out of the kind of environments that are conducive to their mental illnesses, right? In terms of maybe an abusive family, in terms of perhaps being like always around certain traumatizers and so on. Secondly, we think it gives them the financial means to actually cope more effectively with their mental illness in terms of access to like better medication and so on, right? But like most importantly, we think what you are doing on their side of the world is absolutely limiting this person's social interaction with other people. And we think it's absolutely of primacy that mentally ill people have access to these kind of support networks. Make the connection, know that they are not at all that different, that people can like them for who they are. We think you've doing that on their side of the house. We think they need to prove to you that employers are going to be benevolent and not care about productivity, not care about the bottom line and how this person with ADHD is going to affect that. And before I move on to how this also affects people who are currently employed within that kind of work culture and how that's also really harmful, I'll take a moment.
Mesh extension, are you saying also that criminal records should be accessed by employers because it affects the kind of perception they have of these people and their productivity?
We think if it is a criminal record with like a history again of like with a history of immediate violence towards like yourself or to other people, then we think that is something that could be discussed as well, right? We are fine with that, right? But now on to why this really affects employees and so on, right? Because we think that even if you are currently employed within your company and that is unfair grounds for you to be dismissed on, taking into account by the way that if opposition's problem is going to be a sustained and continued lack of like job performance or whatever, that is a valid ground to fire someone on, right? But like forget that, right? In terms of employees and how employees will react to this kind of thing, we think this is precisely the kind of thing that causes ostracism within a kind of work culture, right? Where you exclude someone from sitting with you at lunch, where you kind of whisper as they pass down the corridor. We think that's precisely the kind of thing that compounds someone's mental health, right? When they're worrying or obsessing about the ways that people view them in a way that's different. But we think it also influences the way that employers interact with their employees insofar as not giving you projects that allow you to grow, right? Because they think if we give this project to this person who's suffering from anxiety, they're probably going to screw it up, right? They're probably going to make a mess of it. They're probably not going to handle it. We think this affects the perceived capability of this employee and the actual capability to that effect of seeing themselves continually being denied these kind of opportunities. We think it compounds at all the single harm I told you about in terms of being deprived of that social network, deprived of these support networks. We think there's a lot that side opposition has to defend. We are proud.
Thank you very much for that speech. Hello, please. The clash coming from opposition is going to be simple. We think that access to mental health records is important for employers because it is in line with the existing mechanisms of checks and balances that assure the compatibility of that particular person in the workplace. We think that this is no different from their access to criminal records and medical records, which make sure that that person is going to be compatible in the workplace. But secondly, we think that employees have it better in a frame where employers know their conditions because there's easier access to medical needs, for example, and it allows for a more comfortable and accommodating workplace where there's no need to conceal your conditions, where there's no need to control the kinds of triggers that you particularly have as a person with mental health issues. We think that the motion assumes that there is a vested interest of the state in protecting these people. That's why the question that we have to answer is, where do we protect these people better in all accounts? We think that half of Prime Minister's speech is conceivable because as opposition, we also want to empower these kinds of people with mental health issues, right? But opposition failed to determine how they're going to protect these people in the scenario that they get employed by the valedictorian or is the top of the class. Because ultimately we know that there are different demands that that particular person must be able to meet. Or for example, why we access criminal records and medical records, because we know that different jobs have different specific demands that cannot be only measured by a person's intelligence or skill set. We argue to you that the access to mental health records is a fair extension of the company's right to check the compatibility of that particular employee in the workplace. Because let's break down the nature of mental health. We think that even if we're very supportive of people working in these kinds of companies, it's a condition that affects the ability of the worker to maximize their capacity to contribute to work. Some people have a harder time, for example, concentrating or socializing around people, and these are kinds of things that they might possibly need for the nature of their job. Maybe, for example, as a sales representative, you need to socialize with other people, but that's something that you do not necessarily want to do as a person who has social anxiety, right? Because that it requires certain consideration because they have different needs, like for example, medical attention that is compared to a normal person or someone who doesn't have mental health issues. We think that it falls within the rights of companies and employers to know this because in the instance where they hire that particular person, these are the things that will affect the company and the company will have to deal with inevitably. They need to be able to be given room for them to be able to calculate whether or not they're going to be able to make those kinds of decisions at the end of the day. So we think that it's within the right of that particular company to know the condition of the person that they're going to hire. We find it unsure. Yes, now will you also allow companies to access the records coercively of an employee's political beliefs and sexual orientation? If not, why? Because we think that it's not something that's we don't allow them to do that right now forcibly because it's not something that directly affects their capacity to work in that particular workplace. It's not something that out of the blue is something that they cannot just control ultimately or something that's going to contribute to how, for example, we make sure that they're going to be able to do their jobs, right? So let's talk about the interest of the employee in my second discussion. We need to be able to understand the nature of mental health issues. Most of the time, people who have mental health conditions will not be able to control whatever it is that they have. That's why, for example, people with anxiety cannot control whenever they're going to have a panic attack. Or, for example, people with ADHD cannot really control what are the kinds of things that will make them going to hyper focus on something or anything like that, right? We think that in different workplaces, we've already told you that there are different demands in different environments. There are some that have high pressure and there are some that are laid off. We think that it's the best interest of the employee to know, to ask for employers to know, because number one, corporations or employees will now be able to match or make sure that they're going to be accommodated for what kind of environment best suits them in order to maximize their capacity and maximize their productivity at their place. So, for example, if I know that this person has social anxiety, I will place that person in a place where it's going to require social interaction with other people because that's going to lessen that person's productivity at their day. Without that kind of knowledge, we're only going to rely on what we already know now and might possibly place that person in a workplace that's not suitable for their condition. That proves their harm of making sure of showing that they're going to be accused of being lazy or not wanting to work just because they think that they have mental issues. Compared to when they're placed in places where they can be able to maximize themselves and it's something that will be able to prove that they can still contribute to the growth of that particular company. With all of those reasons and more, we oppose. Thank you. An overwhelming majority of scientific evidence, to the extent of 90%, suggests that people with mental health issues are perfectly capable of being productive individuals. They haven't given you any evidence to the contrary. And more importantly, that's not how social stigma portrays these people, right?
it's important to understand that on our side of the house, we stand for giving these people opportunities in the absence of which they're likely to feel much worse, earn much less, be more discriminated, and at the end of the day, be in much more troublesome situations. The claims from side opposition are as follows. Firstly, this might be in the best interest of the employee. Secondly, the employer might has to know whether or not the employee can fit in. And thirdly, there exist laws in terms of anti-discrimination. I'm going to debunk these individually. First, on the idea of it being in the best interest of the employee. Their case is this. If I'm an employee who has terrible social anxiety and I have to give a presentation in front of 1,000 people, that will make my condition much worse. Okay, 4 points of response to that. Firstly, we think self-censorship is going to exist on part of the employee, whereas I am a person who has social anxiety. I'm obviously not going to work as a PR agent or a person who's going to be a public speaker, right? I'm more likely to take jobs and I know one, I have the caliber in, and secondly, I can accommodate with my mental condition. So people with social anxiety are more likely to take desk jobs where they don't constantly have to interact with people, right? That is the idea of self-censorship that we think these people are pragmatic enough to apply. But secondly, voluntary disclosure, right? So at a point in time when I know that I'm a productive employee of the company, I can still go ahead and say, look, sir, I have social anxiety. Please, I know I won't be in a position to deliver this speech to a crowd of 1,000 people. I'd much rather make the draft for the speech. I'd much rather contribute by making the presentation. I'd much rather code. Those are things that are still feasible. But thirdly, right, this voluntary disclosure still doesn't have to be to the extent of saying that I have a mental disease, but simply, sir, I have stage fright. Sir, I don't think I'll be able to handle these jobs. We don't think companies are going to be that unreasonable that at a point of voluntary disclosure of discomfort, they're going to push an individual into something, right? Why is that the case? Because they themselves recognize that this individual might not be best suited for that, right? But thirdly, right, at best their cases, this person takes up this one job and is not perfectly tuned for it. We think this person can still be shifted to a different department, can still be given different sort of a work that they're more accustomed to, right? And lastly, that is based, all of that is based on an arbitrary bias against mentally ill people that they cannot handle extra burden, that they cannot handle issues that are more complex, right? We tell you individuals who are depressed have very often written the most complex of research papers on their conditions. People who suffer from Asperger's syndrome have often been one of the most qualified lawyers in the world, right? So those cases of these people absolutely not being able to do things are lies, right? But the second thing they say is, well, it is important for the company to estimate whether or not this person can fit into the work environment, right? 3 levels of response to that. First, it's a pure assumption that after knowing that this person has a mental illness, the company is going to give this person the benefit of doubt, right? Because on our side, we characterize to you why in most cases companies, and we're taking out the most benevolent companies of the Silicon Valley, in a majority of the cases, employees are simply not willing to take that chance in the first place because they think that while this might be an added work burden, this person is bound to fail, right? What we tackle on our side is this arbitrary default assumption that just because you're mentally ill, you're likely to have a panic attack. Just because you're mentally ill, you're likely to be sitting in a corner sobbing all day. Those assumptions are tackled, right? But secondly, right, we tell you often the biases that they have are also infounded. Because the example that they gave us was of the company being able to afford this person's medical illness bills and all, right? Again, in a majority of these cases, these medical illnesses are in fact very accessible, something our Prime Minister pointed to, right? So drugs that cure like immediate anxiety attacks and people suffering from people suffering from depression are often very cheap and if not are often state subsidized, right? So we tell you that the company doesn't have to bear the direct cost in most cases, right? And secondly, right, the idea is this. Even if we think this company makes that assumption, we think they're still likely to discriminate against this person at all stages post-employment, right? So at a point in time when the company absolutely refuses to engage with this person, give them scope for internal improvement, the employees start ostracizing this person. That means that disclosure, even post-employment, makes this person's situation much worse. The third thing they say is, well, anti-discrimination laws exist. 4 responses to that. Firstly, in a majority of the cases, the company's employment processes are likely to be opaque, right? This can be simply based on them filling out forms or them applying through their CVs, right? In those cases, we tell you companies can very well get away by not disclosing the reason as to why they did not choose a particular candidate, right? But secondly, right, even if we were to think that these laws exist, in a majority of cases, they're
ambiguous, right? In the sense that they say a company has a right to prioritize the interest as long as the employee doesn't directly compromise that interest. I, as a lawyer, can interpret that to mean 10 different things, and at a point in time where I'm fighting for a company that has millions of dollars, we don't really think that one person suffering from a mental illness condition has any capacity to outdo the legal team of a company that has 50 lawyers at their disposal, who can then find evidence for that and precedents for that across 50 cases in 50 different countries, and they can easily win those cases, right? What is a real life example of the same? Before that, I get
You're still operating on the worst case. You have to respond to the idea that what if they suddenly have panic attacks and then everyone is just going to be shocked? How are they going to be dealing with that kind of
okay,
situation?
listen. Firstly, if your best case is that this one employee is going to go on a stage and there's no panic attack, that's a best case that works in the extreme, right? But secondly, we tell you, it's not as if somebody has had a panic attack. My ability to provide them immediate relief is in any way compromised because I can still call 911. I can still call an ambulance, right? So it's not as if that person is immediately going to die, right? That is something that they cannot really win on, right? But lastly, giving the evidence of where companies already do this. Today, in the United States, a majority of the companies can deny access, can deny employment to single mothers, and those court cases are pending for the past 20 years, right? So it's not enough for them to say that these people can take these cases to court and actually win. What is the harm on our side of the house, right? We tell you that you often prevent these individuals from getting economic independence, right? You often prevent these individuals from moving to new environments where they're likely to be socially accepted, right? You often prevent at a point in time where these individuals face constant rejection, their conditions are likely to be much worse. What they have to deal with is firstly this assumption as to why a mentally ill person is not going to one voluntarily disclose or do self-censor, but thirdly, why companies post knowing this are not going to arbitrarily deny this person opportunities as opposed to taking the risk. We don't think companies are that charitable. They didn't characterize them as that, and for those reasons.
Thank you for that speech. PL, please. We have to ground this debate to reality. Because although we recognize how these individuals are still able and productive, we have to still recognize that there are particular needs that also needs to be addressed in these kinds of scenarios. Government failed in doing two burdens, right? Firstly, they failed to answer the long-term goal of gaining recognition for the burden of these individuals and the qualification of rights being attained by these people to begin with. But secondly, they never engaged in the best case scenario that they would be getting better and that they would be getting tough. So what would you do now, right? That a couple of responses to the very value that they argued to begin with. They try to tell us that they want to protect these mentally ill individuals because now they'll be more open to employers and those kinds of stuff and socioeconomic recognition, right? The first level of responses, they never even gave an analysis on how they'll automatically open up because it's under the assumption they are comfortable enough to share their mental health illnesses. No description of the CK of how mental health individuals who have recognized being discriminated their whole lives would suddenly open up to companies that they don't even know the status of mental health recognition. But secondly, we even contrast that back because you place these individuals on the guise that they are devoid of any mental health diseases. You place them the burden of continuing that facade of being normal compared to the societal standards, right? It becomes particularly harmful because they're scared of the backlash that would happen. They suddenly have attacks or they suddenly show people that they are depressed or things like that, right? You proliferate that harm that you stated, which is discrimination of employees on two fronts. Firstly, in terms of employers and employees, this would further judge them of the merits of being stupid because, for instance, you don't particularly understand their situation. You're gonna judge them, for instance, that these people are incapable because they can't even pay attention to what I'm saying. They can't even do it fastly, or they can't even mentally, or they can't even concentrate on all of the things that they need to concentrate because some people are like that diversity, right? But secondly, the concealment further triggers these diseases because if, for instance, they are depressed and they are under the guise of being a normal individual, they would usually put themselves in an isolated stance. They would be in echo chambers of depression because they would always keep themselves from being sad. They would always want to act happy because they don't want to be fired the moment that those companies or those employers think that these individuals are not capable enough compared to the people who are. So, for instance, you further worsen it under their model because you also deprive these individuals of getting mentally checked if their health is alright, if they're taking the correct medicine, or even if they have proper counseling, right? Comparatively, under our model, wherein you allow people to work in a more comfortable model, in a more comfortable manner. Firstly, it was already explained by Bianca. When you accommodate them in terms of their particular needs, this further translates to the workaround, right? For instance, I'm giving you projects that you can be experts on. For instance, if you have excessive concentration, then you can work on things that can also help with that, and that's even beneficial for our company because we have people like you that would stick with projects regardless of whatever happened, right? We think that that's particularly better because the need of anti-discrimination policies are more apparent and has more power because these individuals are already recognized of mentally health diseases to begin with, right? You push these individuals on that merit to fight for their rights because the company already knows they have mental health diseases compared to where their model wherein they're scared to fight for their rights or they're even scared that they don't have the ability for a fight. You further disempower them by not even recognizing their mental health diseases to begin with, right? But secondly, you lessen the discourses that happen under our model because now people are just gonna pass by as normal. Let's assume the best case when people are not recognized, where are people not recognized being mentally ill, or those things like that. You further lower the chances of discourse happening because people are not gonna talk about it because we're gonna think that they're already okay because they have jobs properly socially and economically stable, and you never really get the social acceptance they're trying to fight for, right? But lastly, they try to tell us this idea that this harms their meritocratic chances, not given projects and those kinds of things. It's not particularly true because they even properly allocate projects. I mean, these are companies who are profit oriented and most likely they would maximize those people that have jobs and they would utilize individuals for what they hired them for. So we tell it particularly even under best case, we have it right. But you make it harder under model because you place them beyond their capabilities. For instance, I have high mental concentration, and you place me in jobs like, for instance, that I cannot automatically just assume. Right? Yeah. So before that, yeah. And the entire argument of the company not being able to take proper care of the mentally ill person rests on the assumption that the company will hire this person in the first place. Can you please prove that assumption? I try to prove you that assumption. Because as of now, there is already a recognition of mental health campaigns. If you take a look at the Philippines, wherein it was recently passed the mental health recognition, that this also passes that these individuals should not be judged on that merit. That companies are still within the right to understand. Because even the state understands that you have to give balance to individuals, right? There are alternatives such as affirmative actions of anti-discrimination law or even welfare that you are given to these individuals. But you cannot stop on these companies because they may even turn volatile in these situations, right? Wherein they would even hire because they've already learned from their lesson, right? No more points, right? First case on how this is counterintuitive to development of mental health recognition, right? This answers the case that even on the best case scenario, wherein these people do get employment, you further worsen it because you lessen mental health visibility. This works under the premise of what the goal of mental health movement is to begin with. It's the recognition in public masses and lobbying for rights and recognition of individuals by diverse cognition, right? The current efforts include mental health campaigns and really reaching out to people who have mental health illnesses or those kinds of things, right? We argue that although you achieve the short-term benefit of socio-economic rights, these kinds of things, you harm the long-term fight of mental health illness awareness and recognition because it's a conceded goal that we want to protect these individuals. But the question now becomes, what happens under their model when they do get employed, right? When mentally displaced individuals do get jobs, they have no incentive of getting mentally checked because they think that they're already normal. We're talking about individuals that are just getting jobs and they never really recognize that they have depression. Because some people are like that, right? This is assuming under their model, right? We tell you that it's particularly harmful because if you compare it under our model, where there's a large number of individuals that are experiencing these kinds of discrimination, there are a large number of individuals that are still fighting their rights, then you're allowing the mental health long-term goal to be accepted. Because we decide opposition from basing their claims on the fact that there is mental recognition in Philippines, when throughout both of their speeches they have used to describe the way mentally ill people work as stupid. We think that the first question that we need to answer this debate in is the question of compatibility. We agree with side opposition when they say that employers can, in certain situations, give you different tasks assigned on the basis of your mental health, can make them more sympathetic towards you. And that's where on government our model accommodates that. Because we have told you that voluntary disclosure is still an option that is available to the employees. The question that they have failed to answer in this debate is that why is it that companies and employers are exclusively in a better position to unilaterally make this call of whether or not this individual deserves this infrastructure or not? Why is it that the individual himself cannot take this call? They haven't been able to engage with the fact that companies are more likely to not hire you as a result of you disclosing this because of the stigma that surrounds depression and anxiety and the assumption that both of these things are limited to lack of productivity. That only premise is literally this that comes out in DLO is that no, things are changing. There is mental recognition in Philippines. In India, if you're accused of being mentally ill, you're taken to the street, beaten by sticks, and accused of witchcraft. That is the level of mental recognition in countries like India and China, which, by the way, constitute half of the world, right? And even in the free world, which is the European Union and the United States of America, people with mental illness are 50% less likely to be hired as opposed to somebody who is mentally stable, even if their credentials are exactly the same. We don't think that there is any legitimate mental recognition that they have been able to prove to you that is a changing trend, and opposition will is far too late for them. Which is what brings me to my our second critical clash of this debate, which is, what avenues exist for redressal. There are still discrimination laws. As a final year student of law, there is a couple of good things that I can tell you about how discrimination laws work. One, there is no quantitative mechanism in place right now to adjudge why an employer rejected an employee. So, for instance, in India, women are 50% less likely to be to get a job that a man can get. But the reason that is given is never that I rejected her because she was a woman. It's because I rejected her because she said something really stupid in her interview. So sure, there is a law that exists that might say you can't discriminate on the basis of gender or on the basis of mental illness, except there is no real way to implement that law because there is no quantitative mechanism or accountability on the part of the employer to tell you why exactly he rejected it and why is it that the employer simply can't give an absolutely different reason regarding this. Secondly, in terms of discrimination laws within the workspace after you have been employed, we think that there is no law for microaggressions. You can't sue somebody for the fact that they haven't invited you to a birthday party, or the fact that they don't want to sit with you on the table, or they don't want to work with you on a project. There are no laws in any country right now that accommodate cases of microaggression and discrimination. So if somebody is whispering about you, you can't use that in a court of law saying I heard them whisper about it to me and I felt bad. But thirdly, even if they do, we think that's a pure case of absolute double jeopardy. Because in one situation now somebody has been discriminated on the basis of his mental health, and now you're going to make him run around in courts every single day, repeating that sort of mental discrimination and disallowing that individual to ever get over what happened. We don't think that discrimination laws are enough for them. But fourthly, something that Mark told you they haven't been able to engage with. There is obviously a lack of balance in terms of who has more money when it comes to going to court. So you have one individual who's probably not got a lot of jobs because obviously has a lot of money, and versus him is a conglomerate that hires the best possible international trade lawyers in the world. Who is more likely to win? A question I don't really want to answer. Thirdly, in terms of lack of performance, again, we can't emphasize this enough. Anxiety, depression aren't really linked to lack of performance. And that's why we told you self-censorship comes into play when it comes to positions of responsibility, something that they haven't been able to engage in. We told you that the self-censorship mechanism is very simple. If I am somebody with social anxiety, I will not apply to be a public speaker. Perhaps I'll apply to be a coder. There is no link between social anxiety and my lack of ability to perform as a coder. That's what they haven't been able to answer, apart from saying what if they do stupidity in these situations. We think that's not only morally reprehensible, that is
of itself. Which is what brings us to my fourth and very, very, very pressing question, right? Long-term benefits. We've told you at least three very important things. Firstly, it removes the focus from your trauma, right? Because now you have a purpose that you're constantly moving towards and not constantly thinking about the reasons for your depression. Two, we told you that it gives you a social environment, but three, it also provides you a social mechanism to escape a potentially disruptive environment. And fourthly, we told you how responsibility breaks the cycle of depression. The only two long-term benefits that they have been able to tell us is first, more discourse. We don't know how that tangibly materializes or what the benefits of more discourse, quote unquote, is. But more importantly, and this is particularly funny, they come up and they say, but some people just don't know that they're sick, so they never seek help. If they don't know that they're sick, then there's obviously no record of the fact that they're sick either. So even if they get the job, there is no way that the employer will now be able to look at you and say, probably ADHD you have, and then take him to the hospital, right? If they themselves don't know, and if nobody else knows, we don't know how them getting a job is going to make them aware of the fact and then seek them medical help. But more importantly, we think that if employers are less likely to hire people that are mentally ill, people, and if they do end up hiring them in this situation, this individual is more likely to know that he has a mental illness because of the health insurance that the employer provides the employee. So now he has money to seek mental health and actually find out whether or not he is somebody that is suffering from mental problems. And finally, the fifth question of where really do they draw the line? This is kind of weird, right? Because when we ask them a POI leader proposition of, will you really inquire into whether or not what somebody's political affiliations are, what their sexual orientation are, they said, look, no, we won't do that because that doesn't really limit their function, limit their ability to function. We think that firstly, a very problematic assumption because they've again assumed that somebody's mental illness is necessarily a barrier to their performance. But more importantly, we think that if you really come down to the comparative, your political affiliations are just as much as a barrier to your performance. Right? We think that when it comes to say things like a Republican doesn't want to really sit with a Democrat, or the fact that somebody who's homosexual doesn't really want to interact with the certain sex for some or the other reason. We think that in and of itself is enough of a barrier, or at least as much as opposition has been able to prove, as a barrier to your productivity as mental health is, if mental health is a barrier at all. So all the reasons on government, we're very, very happy to do this.
Thank you very much for that speech. So, wait, please.
Before we move on to my discussions, let's first ask the question, where does the debate operate? The debate operates not only on the assumption that they're never going to get a job, because that's only a layer that they fail to, that even if they succeed, their best case, which I'm going to prove to you is not really true, you still have to analyze how the kinds of harms that they told you in their section, microaggressions, people feeling like they're ostracized, and that people are automatically going to talk about these discussions in an environment that is hostile to mental health. How are those benefits going to accrue? Because even though assuming that other negative contributions do have bearing in the debate, it still begs the question, how do we then better the condition of these individuals? Because the two important questions of the debate are simple. Where do we better the socioeconomic prospects of these individuals? But secondly, where do we create attraction for mental health discussions? Because under the first question, government also conceded to the frame that there's an existing government interest in making sure that these people are aware or that the employers are aware of their mental health conditions. Bianca already talked about the idea that in status quo, there are quotas and tax incentives, for example, for taking in minorities, because they operate in a paradigm that women
global health movement that never would have been possible in the Philippines if a lot of advocates didn't stand up and discuss about it. We think even in those countries, given that the internet is prevalent, there are trends and discussion that they can engage into to the kinds of betterment that they can do to your life, to the kind for in terms of, for example, even coordinating movements that tackle corporations that do these kinds of works. We think that in the comparative then, assuming even in their worst case, that in their frame nobody's gonna get employed, at least we have traction for discussion that would never otherwise exist. And we think that that's significantly important in the debate because the debate assumes government incentives to make sure mentally ill people are going to be better and going to be protected. And we think that even in the worst case, obviously it goes to opposition, right? But they never analyze the claim, assuming that these people are employed on the second level. We think that all the harms of socioeconomic mobility that's not gonna happen, doesn't exist. We think they're flawed fundamentally because one, they never really told us later how socioeconomic mobility is going to exist on their side because they never operationalized. All they have are negative contributions. Firstly, people are going to talk about you because you're weird, right? We think that happens either way. At least on our side, you have legal protection to call out these people. For example, tell your company that I'm uncomfortable with the kind of behavior that your employees are doing. Can you please do something about it? Then comparatively, you even have more traction on our side because the fact that your employers know that you have a mental health condition gives them an imperative to do something to make sure that you're productive anyway. Secondly, you're not going to be given projects. We told you coming from second speaker that that's highly unlikely because they're profit oriented. What they're going to do is adjust the expectation of those projects, for instance, based on your condition. For example, I have anxiety and I can't really sleep, and all this stress is affecting my work performance. For example, they're going to extend my deadline because they know that even if I've been working for 3 years, I can finish this project and I'm confident. Anyway, that doesn't happen on their side. Then comparatively also, microaggression also happens, but at least on our side, we pointed out because, and you can prevent that because there are already existing protection mechanisms in the office. They had to prove that the workplace has to have protection mechanisms on their paradigm as well before 6 years.
Yeah, now finding that you consider that they won't be employed, are you okay with tens of thousands of mentally ill people being unemployed as a trade-off to some people having abstract discourse about their unemployment?
We already talked about like this. When they're unemployed, it's obviously that they're gonna go together because they know a lot of them are unemployed and actually do something about it in the form of movement. She never responded to that. That's our worst case analysis. Secondly, we think it's also harmful because one, their best case scenario relies on the fact that these people will tell their employers, but at the same breath, they told you that people are gonna commit self-censorship, right? I think the tendency of you as a mentally ill person is try to act as normal as possible because you don't want their whispers and you don't want their scars. But I think the tendency of you telling your employer that you're mentally ill is not gonna happen because on their paradigm there's already stigma. But we think that on their paradigm, the harm intensifies that you have a tendency to not reject projects that you think are stressful for you because you're under the guise that you're actually normal. For example, jobs are static. When you have a promotion, you still have to talk to a lot of people even if you apply initially for a desk job. But then you enable yourself to have more socioeconomic mobility on our side because you prepare yourself even when the job description changes that you're going to be equipped for that and the kind of environment that you're going to have is less stressful. So we think even in terms of social environment, we're better. But lastly, in terms of traction for mental discussion, we think you don't have that on their side. And at best, you have the benefit of allowing some people to have jobs while a lot of other people with more rare illnesses or more severe illnesses are going to get hurt. We think if we don't want that trust, at least our side, you have the benefit of discussion, you have the benefit of a caring government, and that's something that they will never have in the government. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech. All for five, please.
Coming from the opposition side, we never tried to prove to you that these people are less productive compared to other people. We just told you that there are a lot of instances where they're not able to control their conditions and it affects their productivity. In those kinds of instances, for example, what is then the company going to do? Because we've already told you that these people will never be able to solve their conditions. And most likely, what they're going to do is to self-conceal because they don't want other people thinking that they're just declining projects or they're just declining the presentation of something just because they're lazy or just because they don't want it. Those are the kinds of perceptions that we want to correct and we want to avoid in opposition side. That's why we think knowing the condition of a person is very important in order for you to be able to understand what are the kinds we're not living like 20 years ago anymore, and that the kind of discussions that we have towards mental health has developed, and we have more institutionalized protections in order for us to be able to accommodate these people. We recognize that those kinds of laws, the kinds of mechanisms that exist in status quo are not perfect, but they are in place and they could be accessed by these people at the end of the day. We told you that in the worst case, that they still are not they're still not so effective, and a lot of other people are still discriminated against and not employed because the current mechanisms fail. That's still going to be our worst case is definitely better than their worst case, than their best case, because ultimately we know that the government needs to create more imperative to make sure that these people are going to be protected. We think that that kind of protection would not have otherwise existed on their side, because in their world, the discussions about mental health and how they're badly discriminated against is going to be watered down because we have this illusion that these people are already getting that these people are already getting by, that they no longer need assistance from the government. We think that that kind of imperative in itself and that kind of awareness on the part of the government is something that we need to fight for. We don't want to create the illusion that these people are already okay just because some of them are confined in spaces where they think that they are already okay because they have employment. We don't want them just getting by every day in the concealment of their real conditions and not being able to talk about those kinds of things to other people just because they're scared that it's going to lessen their employment opportunities because everything that they do is going to be attributed to their mental health or mental illness at the end of the day. And that's something that they never address on their side. So we tell you that in the worst case that they're not going to get employed, at least it creates a government imperative to make sure that we improve their lives at the end of the day. But secondly, where's their environment better? Because their best case scenario is that these people are going to get employed because there's no longer the stigma that they try to characterize on their side of the house. We've already told you that they still will not be able to control their conditions. And in the instance that, for example, even if there's self-concealment and you apply only for a job that you think you are apt for, there are still going to be demands which are not which might limit you and which might trigger your conditions at the end of the day. In those kinds of instances, what is the company going to do? We think that even if they will be able to create measurements, like for example, call 911 and create those kinds of actions, their first action is ultimately going to be negative towards these people because they don't understand the reason why they have stage fright. They don't understand the reason why, for example, they don't like being around other people. I think that in order for us to be able to create a better world for these people, understanding is the first step that we have to take, and we will only be able to understand them if we know their conditions. Thank you. Thank you very much for that speech. Go for class.
Firstly, to win this debate, opposition had to prove that status quo is changing drastically and it is changing in a huge pace for the benefit of the mentally ill people, right? Let's see how they've tried proving that, right? In second speech, they say, well, Philippines has an anti-discrimination law. Of course, like I'm telling you, about 100 countries have an anti-discrimination law, except you haven't told us how that law is likely to materialize. You haven't talked to us about the efficacy of that law. You haven't told us why that law cannot be interpreted in multiple ways to still continue to discriminate. So that is a trend that they cannot buy. But secondly, an argument that comes out exclusively in opposition with, and therefore ought to be primarily discarded, is discussion on internet and internet outrage. Again, without really telling us how that internet outrage materializes into anything, without really telling us how, like, till the time that internet outrage is likely to materialize, you're okay with tens of thousands of depressed people losing out on their jobs just so that 50 years later somebody creates a hashtag that stops discrimination against mentally ill people, right? They haven't told you why that trade-off is justified. But let's look at what their best case is. That too becomes clear only in op-ed. They say, well, companies have an incentive to be accommodative, well, because you've hired them already. Two responses to that. A reminder to you at the first level that hiring them already part has never been established from that side, right? Because in their world, they haven't really told you why companies will first hire someone when they still can use the laws in order to discriminate and not take that extra cost. But secondly, post hiring, why will they take all that extra burden, right? If the entire case is that there's so much specific infrastructure that you have to create, why will the company take all of that extra effort, all of that extra money, and not just simply give this person a tokenistic job and say, be done with it, right? That is something that they haven't established, right? And thirdly, even post hiring, they did not ever deal substantially with our arguments of the microaggressions that continue to exist in the workplace environment. They just said company will create a conducive environment. I don't remember the last time a company fired 50 of its employees because they refused to sit with one person. We tell you that doesn't happen from the real world. But let's look at their worst case. And personally, I'm morally abhorred by what their worst case is. They say, well, we're fine with tens of thousands of mentally ill people losing out on their jobs, being rejected constantly, day in, day out, going back to the same environment where their family comes every day and thinks of them as losers, just so that they can be aggravated to the point where they, one, do something about it, and second, have discourse. We think that, firstly, simply on the level that you want these people to go through this much torture in the first place is a terrible thing for you to suggest. But secondly, you haven't told us how does that doing something about it ever materialize? You haven't told us how that discourse is inexclusive, because on our side we told you right from the beginning that discourse is much likely to happen better when these people are more confident of themselves, when these people have a more financial backing and are in a position of authority. So here's the comparative if you did not realize that in the three speeches, right? In our world, these people are employed. These people are likely to be in a much better financial position. And if they continue to face discrimination, they now are in a much better position to vocalize them. As opposed to their world, where these people are unemployed, stigmatized, continue to not have funds, and somehow go and protest on the streets. Right? They haven't told you why that works, we have told you why ours does. But the last reaching argument that they never really dealt with, right? As to they never proved to you why the company is exclusively in the position to make the decision of whether or not this mentally ill person requires extra infrastructure, whether or not this person requires extra support, right? Because we told you, if the company is one willing to provide that and is creating that kind of a conducive environment, then why is this person not going to voluntarily disclose that, right? If I see my boss constantly being conducive of it, why am I not just going to tell him that look, this is a problem that I have? But more importantly, right, they never dealt with a huge chunk of argumentation from our side as to why companies have the ability to manipulate laws, companies have the stigma that discourse is not likely to materialize, and so many people are likely to be unemployed, rejected, poor, and much worse, putting on all those comparisons to opposition.